Hello, everybody. If you are here to explore storytelling in B2B, you are in the right place. My name is Sarah Griesenbach, founder of the B2B Writing Institute. We're a small organization about 2 years old, and we train writers to create really excellent B2B marketing content. And today is really important because I think storytelling often gets a bad rap. None of us, and especially none of our prospects, are pulling up a really good piece of content while we're relaxing around the fire with a drink at the end of the day. So sometimes calling them stories feels really confusing and even misleading. And it can result in a lot of out there introductions for your white papers if we don't have the right context going into using them. So today we have three really brilliant minds in writing and marketing who are going to break it down for us. And I think the goal is to really pull out the pieces of storytelling that are essential for B2B and then apply them in a really effective, non-cheesy way. And that way you're creating content people don't mind reading, that actually sucks them in because it's relevant and fun for what they're trying to do at work. And it helps us connect that human side of B2B because that's what B2B is built and written for. So I don't want to take time away from Grace, Diane, and Jay today. I'll just share two notes. First, the replay for today's event will be available within 24 hours in Podia. You'll get an email when that's ready. And also we're going to have time for Q&A after each of our speakers today. So be generous with your curiosity and just pop that in the chat and I'll save those as we go. So next up, I want to welcome Jay Acunzo. He is host of the podcast Unthinkable and the founder of Make What Matters, which is a resource for creators that I hope everybody checks out after we send the replay video. Jay, thank you so much for coming to join us.
Hey, Sarah, thanks for having me.
Hello. Now, Jay has been around the block on the internet, shall we say? So you might say he has a thing for speaking. There are some talks out there that exist that Jay's been a part of. And I think that's a good thing because I really see you as just the number one source of introspection for marketers is how it feels like it comes up every time you're talking. It's think a bit more about what you're doing before you put it out there.
Sure.
I think that's a message everybody needs. But because you've spent so much time interviewing others, today we're going to turn it around and dig into some questions I had for you. Some of them easy, some of them will require a thinking phase.
Sounds great.
If anybody wants to add to the list, please feel free to put that in the chat. But I'd love to introduce you to the audience, maybe with the story of how you found stories. What brought you in to be an advocate for marketing and especially in B2B? It's not the one that was on the news or the sports channel growing up.
Well, that's just it. I started out wanting to be a sports journalist and I just loved that sports were like a little snow globe you can turn over, but it was contained. Like there was a set of rules and characters, and inside of that snow globe were all these versions of the human experience, like all these classic storylines that you could explore without it being too open-ended. You're not telling stories about the world, it's sports. So yeah, I'm a sports fan. I did all these sort of like usual steps you try to do to get into that industry, like interning at small print publications, big print publications. My college was 30 minutes down the street from ESPN. So I got very lucky with an internship there. And so I just love telling stories, not necessarily being a beat reporter or talking about the games as much as a fan that I am. And so as I got out of school and didn't want to move to a tiny town to cover a sport no one cared about for 20 years, and as print was slowly sputtering along, I got very lucky again with a job at Google. And that put me into B2B. I was advising brands and agencies on their digital strategy and hadn't really considered business, hadn't really considered marketing or sales. And I just was struck by the fact that it's the same idea. Like in our workplace, we have this microcosm of the entirety of our human experience. It's even larger than sports, I'd argue, right? Because sports is like one profession. So now you're talking about work at large. But if you look at the content that we have, it's not really reflective of how a lot of us draw meaning in our work. It's like this bifurcation that I like to rail against, which is vapid Instagram influencer wannabe type people posting like quotes to help you self-actualize, but really they just want influence, or two more white dudes shouting about Facebook, Elon Musk, and Bitcoin yet again. And it's like, where are the stories? Where are the meaningful, there's nooks and crannies everywhere. That's what I want to talk about. That's what I want to explore. It's what I learned from, quite frankly. And so I love telling stories about the workplace. And I think it's because it represents something larger. So when you talk about the introspection, I think that's like pushing aside all the noise and the slog and the conventional wisdom that we're surrounded by every day to maybe re-examine what's my role in all this? Because like I'm inextricably linked to this work. And why do I want to spend my hours on this planet before I'm gone doing this kind of stuff? Or, oh, I forgot that's actually why I got into this, or that's my true north and I'd lost sight of it. Like the foundational human things tend to be much more important than like a list of tips and tricks that you can find in an instant. And we don't really examine those. So rather than do it in like a technical sense, I like doing it through story.
And I wonder, that feels like it layers over what we've been talking about a little bit with the buyer changing with age and with different influences and culture, society, all that stuff. Do you think that need to be relevant is a new thing, or we just newly don't have a tolerance for spending 20 years working for something we don't care about?
I just think we have more control, right? We have more control as a consumer. If I don't like what you have to say, you're gone from my life forever, because there's a lot more choice in terms of competitive sets of products or services or channels, technologies, screens, right? So I have more choice as a consumer. I have more choice in my career than ever before. I don't need to work for a company for 25 years. I experienced that firsthand. I worked for these brands that you're supposed to love: Google, HubSpot, a venture capital firm, which I did actually love. But I really didn't like being an in-house employee. And I just kind of like the project or like the creator work that I do. And yeah, buyers don't have short attention spans. They have shorter interest spans because they have infinite choice. So the only real hack or tactic that works there is you have to provide a better experience.
Yeah, and that softball into your great tagline of, it's not really about who arrives or getting that attention, it's about who stays. Can you tell me more about who the who is? Like, who are we trying to attract with those messages?
Sure.
And maybe who's getting trapped in it?
Let me preempt that by saying the goal of all of this work, like I think a lot of people think marketing is about getting people to see you. It's not. It's about getting people to care, or more aptly showing them why they'd care. So Diane said it in the chat just now. Jay is speaking to my soul right now. Done. Like today's a success. That seriously, like that's the job, is to have someone see your podcast's premise or your blog post headline, or to read something from you or watch you or interact on your website or see you at a conference or whatever, and have them go, not, oh, they're relevant to me, but have them go, they're speaking to my soul. Because that's the job, isn't to be relevant. The job is to be their favorite, which is this emotionally charged, irrational bias towards you. It's like what gets someone to pick you, but also stick with you. That's the job. It's not glancing at you. It's not grabbing attention. That's super insufficient. That's not even the tip of the iceberg. It's like the snowflake on the top of the iceberg, right? The whole job is to hold attention, is to get people to stay, is to show them why they'd care. And there we go again in B2B, agonizing over the latest trend or what gets people to spread your message or something like that. But we're so focused on total reach and we forgot about resonance. And I think the danger, and this is my role that I try to play in this industry, is reach has become such a teachable thing and learnable thing that we're forgetting that it actually starts with and is built on resonance, which I also think is teachable, which I also think is learnable. So that's where I spend my time, is you can learn to resonate more deeply. You can create someone's favorite experiences.
And that's, I'm just a doubter. So like, I can see a world where B2C brands create fanatic fans who are getting tattoos, and it's, that's your decision. But
sure,
you really think that's possible for B2B to have that kind of resonance where somebody is just compelled to support and engage with it?
It's possible if you're playing to people that actually care about their work, right? If all you're trying to do is be the cheapest or the person that wins on a list of, I used to work in ad sales. And when you send out RFPs, typically you get placed on a spreadsheet, and the brand is like vetting all these agencies and all these tech vendors to be like, okay, I'm going to put them all on a spreadsheet and I'm going to compare basically what's the cheapest with the most promised reach. It's a bullshit approach to buying something, but those people are at agencies that churn out talent and make them really not care about their job, right? Their object is to not get fired. But when you can tell a story that has people excited about their work, that has people growing in their careers, that has people thinking big about their brand and about their role in the world for their customers, and you've never thought of it that way, you make people think and feel and act better, now you stand a chance of actually resonating emotionally. So yeah, there's plenty of sales to be had. If you don't really care about any of the stuff we're talking about today, I would wager, though, everybody in this room at least doesn't really believe that B2B is boring, doesn't really believe that it's too far afield from consumer. And I would even argue a little bit more fully for B2B being more emotionally driven, because whereas B2C companies, if you ever work with them, a lot of them think of their audience as numbers, right? Because they're playing to a lot of people. P&G doesn't give a shit about the individual. They don't even know who the individual buying their stuff is. If you're a B2B company or a freelancer, you can get to know your customers, whether it's a proxy for the customer or the actual person. Like, I know Sarah, I know whoever. So I think it's even more driven by story in B2B. It's just that historically that was ignored because you had the one vendor for this. So they didn't have to be good at marketing. You had the one vendor for that. And that's all changing or has changed.
Yeah. Wow. And that I think that just flips it on its head that lack of scale doesn't have to be a bad thing, because that means you can go deeper and mean more to a smaller audience.
I just don't understand who has scale without having resonance that hasn't done something that will crumble soon. I think there's these myths of people who like engineered a viral loop or whatever, which all very well might be true, but they had a sneaky advantage. It's if we only took business success stories from like white dudes who were born into a great, very advantageous situation right from birth. If they're the only success stories, it's a lot of false positive signal there. It's the same way with people who like go viral or have something big or positive. It's like, if you look under the hood, Sarah Cooper, the comedian, is a great example of this. She has a show on Netflix and she has one coming out on CBS. She's in a movie coming out. Before that, she was working for Google in their Google Docs team and struggling with stand-up. And at that time, I talked to her on my show and she was like, I have this small group of people, like 10,000 on my email list and some people on my social channels who adore my corporate comedy. She's like, but I don't want to do that anymore. I want to get to be more of a mainstream comedian. And so everyone's, oh, she's an overnight success because of her TikTok impressions of Trump and all these things. And it's, but if you look under the hood, for years, she was developing her craft and focused on these really core super fans. Like she figured out how to resonate. And then all these things that are a little bit more, I think, headline friendly took hold. And we only focus on that, forgetting the foundation a little bit too much.
Mm-hmm.
You got me on my soapbox today. I like it.
Yeah, that's what we're here for. And the image that came to mind is like when you see this great new actor and then you find out both the parents are famous and then both the grandparents are famous. And it's,
yeah,
how did they get that role?
Right,
yeah.
Right. And what you don't see is, if you think of the creator or the marketing team's body of work, so it's all somehow connected. It's, yeah, I wrote a sports blog and then shifted into this marketing thing, but there were things I brought over. And you might think, oh, this writer came out of nowhere. It's his first job in marketing. This is not what happened to me, by the way. This is just theory, hypothetical. But actually, that person was writing about something or did a lot of, I don't know, speaking in school. Like, it's all connected. And we try to tell the story of this like clean start that led to the overnight success. Donna, you nail it in the comments. If you forget about resonance long enough, you lose your reach. If all you're doing is looking for the net new, what about the folks that already said originally, hey, like I was here to stick around, to go deeper? Like, why aren't you reinventing the thing? Why are you just continuing to do the thing the way it was when I was here to start? And it's, oh, because that's what got you your initial audience. And now you want more and more, instead of going deeper and deeper and giving people a reason to go and get the new people for you for free. Like, every marketer in the world would admit word of mouth is something they'd want more of. And very few people know how to do it or think about doing it that way. They just assume they are. And then they run to total strangers and they're like, look at us, we're good. Look at us. It's very expensive to do marketing that way.
Yeah. And then that drop off afterwards. And then we bring in a focus on lifetime value and retention.
Right. I led the content team at HubSpot for a year, and they were just not aligned with the type of content I wanted to create. So I left after a year. But what I learned very quickly was the company was really good at putting names in a database. They were really good at that. And at the end of my tenure there, the executive team did a tour of the West Coast SaaS companies like Zendesk. I'm going to forget all of them at this point, but Gusto, like these businesses that have great B2B brands and really passionate fans. And HubSpot had this initial group of passionate fans, and then they wanted more and more. So we got good at putting names in a database, like fill out a form with every bit of information, including your social security number and your mother's maiden name and whether or not you're vaccinated. And the answer, God, should be yes. But we're gonna capture all this information before you read our content. We were really good at putting names in a database. What actually happened after that, compared to these other SaaS brands that sort of gave away information for free and were a little bit like more thoughtful about what they were building and creating, the conversion rates were awful. So the executives came back from that tour of their fellow executives in B2B that they admired, and to the marketing team, they were like, we have a problem. Like, it's really expensive to do what we're doing right now. There's no way we go out publicly as a company and IPO successfully with this as our unit economics. We got to fix this. So we have to do things that have the right audience in mind, that have resonance in mind, not just reach. Like all these things that I love talking about, because we've been making a funnel do this instead of this. And that's the goal. This is reach, this is resonance. And they're not mutually exclusive, but unless you have some people doing this, none of this matters.
Absolutely. And I wonder, you mentioned executives. So could you tell me more about having resonance with that level, like what they're looking for in stories and what does provide resonance when they're reading?
Yeah. What is a story if not a vehicle to solve a problem, right? If you don't have any kind of tension in the way you're communicating, you actually don't have a story, right? So a slogan is not a story. An SEO, typical SEO blog post is not a story. A story involves a status quo, which is threatened or disrupted by some kind of tension, conflict, or problem or question that you then resolve, right? So that's like the typical arc of a story. And most B2B communicators are flat because they lack tension. And when you're playing to an executive audience, either in your marketing or internally, you're trying to push people to think more about this idea of storytelling. I think it behooves us to go back to the founding story of the business or back to the decision makers and what frustrates them about the industry. Because I think frustration is a wonderful place to start to build a story. It's almost, there's these like three little moves. There's an analogy involving fire that I like to use. If frustration is a match that you can strike again and again, then curiosity is the kindling and your creativity is the eventual fire. So lots of people are good at striking the match of frustration. Then they sit there holding it and then you get burned. So that's basically Twitter in a nutshell, more or less, right? That's easy. That's lazy. It's easy, but it's useful if you can then take that match and place it up against the kindling of your curiosity and start to be like, this sucks. Why? What causes it? What would be better? Who is doing it in a better way? You start asking all these questions and acting a lot more like an explorer or an investigator than an expert, right? I don't have the answers, but I have a lot of questions. So I'm going to go and tell that story. I'm going to go create a lot of content and sort of refine and aerate the brand's overall story or our position on a certain issue, like supporting the brand. It doesn't have to be the macro story. It could be just what we're focused on right now. And then more you do that, the more you have this like raging fire that people go, wow, you're wildly creative. And so there's all this shorthand in marketing for that. Your mission, your editorial mission, your vision, all these things. But it's hard to find them. So people pick it out of thin air or they forget how to do it. And I think if you just ask an executive, what pisses you off about this industry? What's completely broken? That's maybe not the exact answer. You have to like chip away at it or ask them to pull the thread they gave you, but that's a really great starting point. And then your creative process, your storytelling is meant to try and solve that by asking a lot of questions, creating a lot of content. And over time, you invite people on this journey towards whatever the solution is, to the other side of the tension.
Yeah, and that's just the definition of resonance, is showing people how much you care about what they care about. So that feels like it just directly makes sense.
Like literally audibly, it's resonating with me and against me. It's hitting me. It's speaking to my soul. That's the idea.
And do you have a framework or way to think about coming up with those stories for a brand? I'm thinking of a situation where, let's say a company's hiring a writer and it's one blog post a month, one white paper a quarter, and then a case study every once in a while.
Yeah.
Does each one have its own story? Do they all support like a chapter book, the overriding story, or what's a good way to think about that?
Yeah, I've seen people do it different ways. One extreme in B2B is the author and speaker, Andrew Davis. He very much informed my career early on as a friend and mentor. And so I adopted his approach of creating a quest where this is a big question that I have or a big problem I'd like to solve. And I don't know how. So I'm on this journey to do that. So it's sort of like everything Drew leaks out in like his YouTube videos, in his newsletter, in his speeches. It's all united to try and solve one overarching problem. And everything you get from him over time until the book that he writes is essentially the question that's most burning on his mind right now as it relates to the same quest. So I do something similar with my podcast and my newsletter. That's one very extreme, very regimented approach to this. I think the other approach is much simpler. It's just collecting, and this is any creator's, I think, lifeblood, is just collecting story threads, observations, questions, links, stats, scientific concepts or studies, and yes, little stories you see elsewhere in the market or that you yourself dug up. I think there's a misnomer that we have to come up with all these original stories, but if like you look at the newspaper industry and the way it used to work, tiny local papers bubble up a few stories to the national or to the state paper, which bubble up stories to the national paper, which bubble up to TV.
Mm-hmm.
One angle or conceit that you're trying to approach this with, such that if I told this story or Sarah told this story and we worked at different companies, they'd come out differently, right? Like we could white label it and someone would be like, I know that's Sarah, not only because of her tone of voice, which is a part of it, but also because she took it in this direction and had this hypothesis or angle or asked these questions of that guest. And Jay focused over here. And I know that's what those two people represent in the world, right? So when you're a writer, having that lens through which you can press this piece is really important. And that's very different than saying in podcasting, I'm a podcast producer. I could publish this piece on basically any NPR show or all these narrative tradition type shows. It doesn't matter where I publish it because they're all generic. That's not how we operate in B2B. That's not how a brand operates. It has to have that specific lens that you press whatever it is through it. And it's fine if anyone else tells that story because it's not going to be like the way you told it.
And so you mentioned data and statistics, which just love-hate relationship. It feels like B2B has this fetish for data, but then so much of storytelling feels like it should be about not emotional, but emotions and like things that you feel and maybe things that come from the gut. Where do you see that balance, or which one informs the other when we're talking about all the data we need to use?
There's a couple things here. So I shared the idea, the eye roll moment of data in B2B. And I don't think it's because of data. I think it's because most people in B2B aren't good at using data. Like data is what happened in the past. Also, we interpret data as numbers, but data is just information stored for later use. So I can store numbers. I can also store quotes, statistics, qualitative feedback. So powerful, mini case studies that I can use to convince and persuade internally, or I can just use that to say, the numbers didn't suggest this, but everyone in our audience is super jaded about the usual in our space, or they're incredibly stressed out and rushed. So we're putting long essays, that's the wrong approach. 45-minute episodes, that's the wrong approach. So there's stats, there's surveying, there's qualitative feedback, things people are saying. Look, all of it is data, right? So now what do you do with data? The point of data is to extract an insight. And then the job of the data is over. Then your taste, your vision, your creativity take over. And what you do with the insight is up to you. Where businesses go awry is they let the data lead, right? We're data led. Dangerous. You might have some hits, but that's really dangerous because the data is informing you, not leading you. And by the way, it informs you is through extracting insights first. So there's a couple things. We got to figure out what are we collecting? It's not just numbers. We got to collect actual data. If you really are proud about your data usage, it's more than just numbers. Collect all that stuff for later use. Extract insights. That's plain language. It's not a bunch of numbers or quotes. An insight. And then what do you use that insight for? How does that inform? If you're just writing an article today, great. Given that insight, how does that article change? If you didn't have it, it might have been something different based on your gut, but now you can use that insight to somehow inform it. So that's been my evolution of how I view data in B2B. I used to be like exactly like everybody else who's jaded. And then I realized maybe it's just our use of it and our interpretation of it that's wrong, because there's a lot of good to be had. And I think we throw out the baby with the bathwater sometimes.
Yeah, because the way I see it and the way I use it, honestly, because I know marketers like this, is to use it as a proof point for why I'm allowed to talk about something. It's more about permission to show that something's important, and then you can move on and make your point.
That's a really good point.
Effective.
That is so well said. And it makes me think of is like the reach resonance idea. We're really good at measuring reach-based statistics, reach-based numbers. There's things you can buy, and then there's things you have to earn. And if you really want to know that you have a passionate group of fans that are ready to act, buy, share, you name it, subscribe, you need to start measuring the things that are only earned and can't be purchased. So you can purchase traffic. You can purchase emails. You can purchase downloads for a podcast. For those three, you can't purchase repeat visitors. You can't purchase loyal subscribers. You can't purchase replies to your email list. You can't purchase episode completions for your podcast. Those are earned. And so we need to marry the things you could buy, even if you're not buying them, the things you could buy, because that's the grabbing of the attention, and the things that are earned, right? Because trust and love and actions from that audience, the work of a B2B marketer is to earn trust, is to earn loyalty, is to earn the action. So if we're not measuring how are we earning things, all we're doing is measuring the starting point of a very long buyer's journey. And now all the data is muddied and focused on the wrong things.
Yeah, that feels intimidating from a marketer's perspective, who might just be having that 1 to 3 year tenure at a company before moving on, but to actually move past things that look really good and go for meaning. I think it sounds like that takes some bravery to do that.
I think so. I think a couple things, like hard work is hard work, like good work is hard work. But the other part, to be a little less flippant, is if you can somehow paint a picture to a decision maker near you, a client, an executive, hell, yourself, if you're the business owner, of this is what we want, we're aligned in that. I'm not saying you want the wrong thing in the end, right? Like you want growth, or you want whatever, you want to be known for this in the world. I want that too, boss, client, self. Here's how I think we get it. And so I think we're really bad at discussing new ideas or creative ideas or pushing people to think better in B2B, because I think we try to cleave ourselves off of what others want. But I don't know about you. I've never convinced an executive to stop wanting what they want. I've only ever shown them how the idea I'm bringing to the table gets them what they want better, faster, more sustainably, something like that. And if at the end of all that, you realized I actually fundamentally disagree with everything this executive or leader or client really does want, like I've given it my all there, but we're still really on a different page. At that point, you don't have a sales decision to make or a convincing decision. You have a career decision to make, right? Because you're going to die someday. Don't keep working for that boss.
Boom. That's not a threat, but hopefully
that's not a threat. I am not threatening you. There's this thing called time, which Father Time wins, unfortunately.
It's true. Now I see we're coming up right at the end of our time. I want to make sure I've kept you all a long time already. I have a question. You mentioned being jaded in some ways, but I really see you as one of the more positive people that I
Thanks.
follow and just in the world. So with all the work you do with creators and in the marketing space, what is giving you the most hope right now? Or maybe what examples are making you hopeful about the future?
I think people have gone through enough change in like new tech and new channels and new tactics that we've slowed down a little bit. We're not like when I started in B2B marketing, everybody was leaping, like lurching in every different direction. And I think a lot more people are talking about and thinking about and excited about the foundational stuff. What do we stand for? What change are we trying to make in the world? There's a lot more voices who are talking about that, like as individual personalities. There's also, I think, a lot more organizations executing based on shared values and some kind of vision for their audience instead of whatever I can arbitrage. I think the way I'd sum it up is there are arbitrage marketers, and that's 100% of what they do is they find the thing that's cheap and easy to get into now. And as soon as their shouting is met by a lot of others shouting too, they have to leave for the next channel. Happens with everyone. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but that's a very popular way to do marketing. Arbitrage. I think another is affinity groups, affinity subscription, affinity brands, like that seems to be at least a more popular approach. I don't know if it's winning out yet, but it's on the rise. And that gives me a lot of hope.
I love it. Thank you so much. This has been really informative. And I feel like just ripping a little bit at the seams of things to let people in and to let bad ideas out, I think is what it feels like. So Grace, Diane, everybody who's attended, thank you guys so much.